Good day and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Today, as we continue to watch what is happening on the battlefield, the Russians continue to tighten the noose around Avdiivka. Day in and day out, it is getting tighter and tighter for the Ukrainian forces that are in and defending the town of Avdiivka. The Russians are continuing operations both to the east, to the south, and to the north of the town. Over the last 24 hours or so, the Russians have made additional headway. As you can see here, the noose continues to tighten. Now, there has been a lot of questions in regards to the weaponry that the Ukrainians are using to fight the Russians, specifically Western equipment that has been handed over to the Ukrainians. What is working well? What is not working so well? What has been the biggest problem for the Russians thus far? So interesting information has come out recently about the M777. The M777 155 millimeter howitzer. Apparently, most of these systems, in excess of 70, have been destroyed by the Russians. Why is that? Well, this system has to get close to the front lines. The Russians are pretty good at counter-battery artillery fire. And given the situational awareness closer to the front line, the Russians have become pretty quick at destroying these systems. And again, from what we're hearing is most of these systems have been destroyed. And one of the reasons is the lack of mobility. Once the system fires, unlike a M109, a Paladin, it can't shoot and scoot. It has to pack up, hitched up to a truck, and then repositioned. And there are certain things that must be done prior to this gun system firing, and that's given the Russians time to locate these systems and then destroy them. Now, again, what is the main system, the main reason that the Russians have had so much trouble against the Ukrainians? And it's actually not a weapon system. It's intelligence. From the start of the conflict to where we're at now, the U.S. has provided the Ukrainians real-time intelligence about the movement of Russian forces, especially in the early days of the conflict. A lot of folks believe that the U.S. equipment, such as the Javelin, the NLAW, the British-supplied NLAW, the next-generation light anti-tank weapon that was supplied to the Ukrainians, was the reason for halting the Russian advance on Kiev, for instance. It was part of it. In actuality, one of the most effective Ukrainian weapon systems that was used during during the early stages, especially of the fight, was the Ukrainian system, the Stunka, or the Skiff. This is a Ukrainian produced anti-tank weapon system. It has the ability to be fired remotely, meaning this system can be set up here, and then behind this hill, the actual operator of the system can remotely target Russian tanks and equipment. And again, the combination of this system, again in the early stages of the conflict, with real-time intelligence, really hurt the Russians. Another very good system that was used that probably has destroyed more Russian tanks and armored infantry fighting vehicles, not the Javelin, but the In-Law. The Javelin's a bit more complicated. It has longer range. But as U.S. intelligence was being fed to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians were aware that Russian columns were quite literally road marching into Ukraine, they positioned these In-Law units. They're not guided. They have a predicted line of sight, and they have the ability to top attack a tank and also a direct attack mode as well. But even in direct line of sight mode, where you're manually tracking the target, an incredibly effective weapon system that has destroyed lots and lots of Russian armored vehicles. Probably more Russian armored vehicles have been destroyed by the In-Law than the actual Javelin. And one would argue that the Stunka, the Ukrainian system that was being used, this here, may have actually led to more Russian losses than maybe even the Javelin. Now, we haven't been able to confirm that, but we do know we've seen a lot of video footage of this system being used against the Russians. Very effective as well. And not just against tanks, but other targets. Trucks, bunkers, fortifications, everything. This system has gone after everything the Russians possess. Now, the most fabled system, the one system that has probably, especially in the latter stages of the conflict, the near now, is the HIMARS. This weapon system has single-handedly changed the way the Russians support its military on the front lines. It has changed Russian doctrine in terms of logistical practices. It has changed the way Russian brigade level, regiment level, battalion level leadership members meet and interact. Again, HIMARS combined with this. If you remove this, intel, real-time situational awareness, the HIMARS is probably not that effective. But combined with real-time intelligence, the HIMARS has proved to be incredibly valuable to the Ukrainians. In all probability, each HIMARS that is currently deployed in Ukraine is tracked in real time by the United States. The United States can see where every single HIMARS is on its battlefield mapping system. Every single HIMARS. The information, the satellite information that is provided by the Ukrainians feeds directly to these HIMARS. It is likely that the Russians have not been able to destroy a single HIMARS. Again, these systems operate 40, 50 miles behind the line of contact. great distance, protected by Ukrainian anti-aircraft envelope. But it's the ability of this system to move around the battlefield with great speed, constantly moving, constantly hidden, and then when a target is identified in real time, that is when the HIMARS attacks. And it's not necessarily, obviously, the vehicle, it's the missile system integrated with real-time intelligence. One missile, one kill. Look, the Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps, when he really got his head around the capabilities of the HIMARS, when he really understood just how effective these systems are and how they can be used on the battlefield, at that point he decided that he was going to remove the M1 Abrams from U.S. Marine Corps service. He believed that this system, again, in conjunction with real-time intelligence, had the ability to replace the Abrams main battle tank. If you see it, you can kill it. That is the method that is being used, really, by both sides. But again, this is a highly effective instrument of war. And again, I have not yet seen photographic evidence that would indicate a HIMARS has been destroyed. I've seen a front cabin of what could be a HIMARS, but I have not seen the Russians parade a HIMARS system as of yet. Even the Lancet drone with a 70-kilometer range, these HIMARS can operate even beyond the range of that system. And again, these systems have proven to be a serious thorn in the side of the Russians. And we'll know more after the conflict ends on just how effective these systems are. But I've had the opportunity to speak to HIMARS or MLRS operators, and this is truly an incredible system, especially once the precision-guided missiles were integrated into this system. And that's what the Ukrainians are using right now. But back to our deep state map, we anticipate, again, there's a lot of talk on when Avdiivka could fall. We certainly don't know. Obviously, it's all contingent on how much resources the Ukrainians continue to use to defend Avdiivka, and then obviously how much resources the Russians use to try and take Avdiivka. But we do know the fighting continues. The fighting is very heavy. The Russian drive is methodical. The Ukrainian forces that are fighting in Avdiivka are facing daily horror of Russian glide bombs, Russian heavy artillery, Russian anti-tank guided weapon systems. We're getting close to a point now in which, if you measure from this area here to midway, 3.8 kilometers. So essentially, with anti-tank guided weapons fire, if you have a direct line of sight from the southern end to the northern end of the noose, the Russians can hit anything that is trying to get into Avdiivka. And that's what it's making it very, very difficult for Ukrainian forces trying to get into Avdiivka and continue to supply Avdiivka. And that's just anti-tank guided weapons fire, not to mention artillery fire and everything else the Russians can use to prevent the reinforcement and supply of Avdiivka. So that's where we set. Additionally, there has been further battles near Volhodar. Both Ukrainian forces and Russian forces continue to battle out in this area. And again, the fighting continues. The Russians have counterattacked and made slight gains to the east of Volhodar. So those battles will continue, and then obviously, essentially, fighting continues along the entire line of contact. The Ukrainian supporting YouTube content providers, including the coward of the county, Denis Danilov, Davidov, or whatever his name is, continues to talk about the Ukrainian efforts in Kherson. Again, we are not seeing the type of heavy deployment that would be necessary for a drive to take the key city, the key town of Oleshki. Yes, there are Ukrainian light infantry operating on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, but they do not have the resources to continue an attack that would threaten Oleshki, much less the Kherson area of operations. So that's kind of where we set. We believe this is a Zelensky motivated move to try and draw attention from the failed Zaporizhzhia offensive. If they can create a narrative, the Ukrainians, can create a narrative that says, hey, we have crossed the Dnieper River, we are threatening the Crimea, and your low information person watching possibly the mainstream media, or for instance watching Denis Davidov, who was smuggled out of Ukraine out of fear of being conscripted by the Ukrainian military. And this guy is talking about military matters in terms of what is happening in this area. It's utterly ridiculous. But again, this operation that we're seeing from the Ukrainians right now is not a threat to Russian forces in the Kherson region and east of the Dnieper River. It just is not. So we're going to continue to watch what is happening in Avdiivka, continue to watch what is happening north towards Kupiansk, as we could possibly see a very large Russian offensive towards the middle of winter. We also have to look at what the Russians are going to do in terms of cruise missile and ballistic missile attacks. We believe that the Russians could be preparing for another series of very large-scale missile attacks against Ukrainian infrastructure and military targets deep inside of Ukraine. The Russians are essentially producing between 100 and 200 ballistic and cruise missiles every month, and they have not been using a great deal of them as of late. So we believe the Russians are starting to stockpile those systems. It is believed they have anywhere from 800 to over 1,000 of those systems now built and restockpiled, and they are continuing to replenish their utilized stockpiles that they used earlier in the conflict. So that's where we set for today. We will continue to monitor and watch what is happening on the ground. Thanks for joining us. More to come very, very soon. As always, have a good day.